Welcome to 100 Songs That Define Heavy Metal. I'm your host, Brian Slagel. I'm the CEO of Metal Blade Records. Real quick before we begin, I wanted to make mention that the Metal Blade family lost two members recently, James from the band Ghost or Ghost, and Bo from the band Harm's Way. Both really great guys, both gone way too young. They will both be sorely missed. Metal Blade family gives its condolences to their friends and family as well. So that being said, we're going to go back and talk about Aerosmith. And we're going to talk about the first Aerosmith record, which is a very important record because, well, it's the first Aerosmith record. And they're one of the biggest bands of all time when it comes to hard rock and heavy metal, and very influential, as we've talked about before with them. So we're going to go all the way back to the early stuff and get some interesting stories. We got Mike Faley on from Metal Blade Records, who has some great stories about early Aerosmith and seeing them live and stuff. So that'll be fun. And we're going to bring on our producer, Christian Bladt, to talk about the production of this album as well. But first, let's go up north and see what Mr. Martin Popoff has to say.
Definitely an important song in the invention of heavy metal. Aerosmith Make It. So this is the first song on the first Aerosmith album, man. January 5th, 1973, David Krebs kind of works out a deal. They get some rejection along the way, but they eventually get a deal. So this is Aerosmith being one of the, the prime post-British blues boom bands in America. We've got your Mountain and your Cactus. They're all coming up around the same time. Aerosmith takes a while to get an album out, but they eventually get this out. The band was not too happy with the production of Adrian Barber on this album, and it's not that greatly a produced album. There's going to be a big step up in quality when it comes to Get Your Wings. So this album really does feel like a sort of scrappy bad boy post Rolling Stones, America's version of the Rolling Stones. And then Aerosmith's going to, scratch and claw their way to the point where they were kind of heralded as America's greatest hard rock band or America's greatest band kind of thing, right? So they're going to really advance their way through Get Your Wings and Toys in the Attic and Rocks. But starting with this debut album, yeah, the production's not great. It's Steven Tyler's using that low voice. We've heard Ozzy talk about this as well, and even Roger Daltrey, where they're trying to sound a little more mature, like an old bluesman kind of thing. So it's a testimony to that. And you look at all the shows Aerosmith played for the years leading up to this. There's a lot of covers. There's a lot of old blues. It really is a path very much like the Rolling Stones. But one of the cool things about Make It is that this is the album's heaviest track. It's the most modern track. There's still a little bit of that boogie A-B switch kind of going on in this song, especially right at the beginning. But other than that, most of this is the band kind of moving the hard rock idiom forward. You've got the big hanging chords, you've got the riffs in there, then it's got this heavy break section where you've got these twin leads and Joey Kramer being all kind of violently percussive in there, and then you've got some kind of guitar battle stuff going on there. You've got some modulation at the end. But yeah, this is the album's heaviest song. If you go through all the rest of the track, there's a lot more of a link to the blues. So it's good that they come right out of the gate with the song that essentially is along with even more convincingly, the Montrose album in 1973. Aerosmith is kind of on their way to establishing this new great era for American hard rock that's going to be dominated by them and Kiss and Ted Nugent, essentially, with some Blue Oyster Cult in there, maybe some Mahogany Rush and some Heart, and eventually some Journey, and of course, eventually some Van Halen. But yeah, this is pretty much the most important, the most ambitious, the most forward-thinking track on the debut album. And it's good we're talking about this right now because there's just been a big sort of expanded fat reissue of this record. So there you go, Aerosmith, January 5th, 1973.
Thanks, Martin. He always has a lot of good insights. But one thing that he mentioned that I thought was really interesting was how Tyler was singing a little bit low, like Ozzy was on the first Black Sabbath record. And that one, I really noticed that Ozzy on that first Sabbath record sings a lot differently than he did from there on. I think Tyler kind of the same way, not as much as dramatic maybe as Ozzy was, but interesting that Martin brought that up. Always good stuff from Martin. Why do you have a smirk?
I just was ready.
Okay. All right.
Ready to go.
So now we're going to bring in our producer, the man who produces this show, amongst many other podcasts as well, Mr. Christian Bladt. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you. And you know how I always enjoy every time we get to hear Martin Popoff say boogie instead of boogie. So
I know, yeah.
fun.
Well, again, I'm learning more Canadian than I thought I thought I would ever need to know, but it's all good. I like that Aerosmith picture you have behind you too.
Yeah, it's from 74. It was the earliest one where I guess they could afford to have some kind of logo behind them.
Yeah.
So I went with that.
It's very 70s, which is nice.
Yeah.
So Martin mentioned that the production on this record isn't great. I think we all kind of universally go like, yeah, that's probably the case. But it's, it's a debut record from a band that nobody really knows a lot about, and they certainly didn't have a big budget or probably even a lot of say over whom the producer would be. I don't find it that bad, but it clearly, when you listen to Get Your Wings and all that stuff after that, it's like, oh yeah, that sounds a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a huge step backwards if you're getting these albums the way I did, working my way backwards through the catalog. All of a sudden you get to this one, and the step down from Jack Douglas to Adrian Barber is very sharp. I mean, this essentially, it sounds like a great collection of demos where you're like, oh, I can't wait to hear the real album. And I didn't know anything about Adrian Barber, so I actually looked him up in preparation for this. This is the last album he ever produced, and he lived a long time afterwards. He died during COVID, so he was around for a while. So I don't know, he was available, but I guess this album was received.
Did not do him any favors, basically.
Right. It's almost like this album was his calling card for, hey, do you want me to not try to make your band sound good? But before this, he recorded one of the first known complete live concerts of the Beatles at the Star Club in Hamburg, Germany, in 1962. Because of that, he was their sound technician all the way through their first U.S. tour. So this leads to him working with Aretha Franklin and the Bee Gees, the early pre-disco Bee Gees, for whatever that's worth. But in terms of albums he actually produced, he did the debut album for the Allman Brothers, which has Whipping Post on it. And he did the Velvet Underground album, Loaded, which I did have to look it up because I don't really know the Underground that well. But that one has Sweet Jane on it. So he produced a couple of songs that I think a lot of people know. There's somewhere in the conversation, both of those songs for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But then he does this. And I mean, I think we can all think of great albums where the engineer, the producer, sit back and let the band do their thing and sit in studio. A live in the studio album, Exile on Main Street, is one of the best ever. This is just like, oh, they're still figuring it out. This band, I think, was too new to be left to their own devices.
Yeah, I mean, I remember thinking, same thing. I went backwards. I think I heard Get Your Wings first. It was either that I Toys in the Attic. I can't remember which one, but nonetheless, I went backwards like you did, and was definitely like, oh, that doesn't quite sound like the other ones did. But they just, it's a debut album, and they're kind of a garage band anyway, kind of sounding. So I know Mike Faley's got a really good story about seeing them early on, so it'll be interesting to A/B between like how the record sounds and how they actually sounded. I'm going to guess that it's going to be much better live than the album was, but it didn't really. It's still such a good record, and there's so many good songs on here that it doesn't make me go like, oh god, this record has to be remixed and redone, because I didn't feel like it had to do that, just because I still love all the songs on it.
Right. And I think that goes a long way. These songs are great songs. And Martin mentioned it, and I know you have also checked out this, what they call a deluxe version of it. It was remixed, but in a way where it's like, okay, I mean, it still kind of sounds like the same, but not any better, really.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about this a lot through the podcast, and I talk about this all the time. And look, I own a record company, and there's a lot of records that I was not happy with the production on, even on Metal Blade wise. But of course, some of the ones like the first 3 Armored Saint records. Well, probably the first one's the worst one in terms of the production. That could have been so much better, but you just can't go back and remix it. People are just used to it.
Yeah.
We've gone back and redone stuff here and there for some of the early stuff that we spent no money on. Everybody's kind of used to the way it sounds, so there's nothing you can really. I can't remember any time where I heard something like, "Oh, that's so much better than the original," even though the original didn't sound good. And so I was pretty disappointed in that box set for a couple of reasons. Number one, the remix, it was okay, but it wasn't like, oh my God, this is 1,000 times better. The remaster helps. That was good. And the live show's cool.
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting because, we talked about this on one of your Bladtcasts, we're talking about Kiss Destroyer, where Kiss and Aerosmith were the big rivals back in the 70s, and I loved both, but Kiss was my band. So here we look at Kiss just did these box sets for Dress to Kill and Alive, and that box set is insane. Like it's like this, like I can't even. It's so big I can't even fit it in my screen here. With all the extras and the remasterings, everything are amazing. It's a gigantic book. And then the Aerosmith one, I mean, it's good, but it's not like what some of the Rhino stuff they've done, or even Thin Lizzy or Kiss. I was kind of a little underwhelmed, I guess, by what was in it.
Any kind of booklet. I mean, there is a booklet, but it's mostly photos. Any kind of thoughts from the band. I mean, I went through the internet to prepare for this, and I'm like, oh yeah, the Wikipedia is more interesting than what they put in this. And you always want to double check things on there. The one thing that I'll say about the production on this, because it is so bare bones, I would say that, at least my guess is, this album really is Steven, Joe, Tom, Brad, and Joey actually playing on the album, because we all know Get Your Wings has a lot more. Get Your Wings has Steve Hunter, Dick Wagner. I mean, those are the ones we know.
Yep.
So at least this is really them.
Yeah.
But I think that the most listenable thing on this is the live show, because I've never heard a live show from all the way back in 1973. So this is actually pretty good.
I have bootlegs of that show actually, and it's pretty good. But it's always fun because I have bootlegs. Same thing with the Kiss, all the Kiss stuff that they've put out, and it goes the same with a lot of the Sabbath when they did Sabotage reissue. I have bootlegs of all of those shows, but it's always better when you get like the official version, because they get the original tapes and they remix it and stuff, and it's definitely a great show for sure. But yeah.
One of the things that Martin mentioned, which I think is the most noticeable thing, talking about working your way backwards, and you hit the debut album, and Steven sounds the way he does. And I have a few quotes from him. So he tries to say that...
From Steven?
I have a few quotes from Steven. In his autobiography, he just talked about it. They were so scared, he changed his voice into the Muppet, Kermit the Frog, to sound more like a blues singer. And he also said that he didn't want to sound like a white boy in the choir. And he didn't like the way that his voice sounded. He was really insecure, but there was nobody to tell him not to, which even an album later, he's already Steven Tyler. He's, hitting the high notes and everything. And just imagine like letting him be like, okay, yeah, do a Kermit the Frog impression. It's kind of like, telling Nolan Ryan, you should really work on a knuckleball. I think that that's really
right.
Good, and just the idea that he does that voice, and this voice is fine, but he could do so much more. That's really jarring.
Yeah, well, that's why I mentioned, when Martin said that, because it is the same thing when you listen to Ozzy on the first Black Sabbath record. His register is lower than it was coming out. Martin made the thing that they're trying to sound like blues singers more than their own voice parts of it. So that kind of does make sense, because they both were, basically came from the blues, and they're kind of doing the same thing. But it's just interesting how both on these, still these amazing debuts sounded different than all the rest of the records after that.
Yeah. And, again, like we were saying, it doesn't take away from the fact that these are great songs. This is a great collection of songs, and album one, song one, Make It, the song that we're talking about. It's such a great way to introduce yourself into the world. And the thing that was most interesting in this collection, this 50th, I guess technically it's the 53rd anniversary reissue that they put out, but the 50th anniversary reissue, there's a rehearsal take, and then another alternate take. And he doesn't start with the line in either of them, "Good evening, people, welcome to the show," which seems like such a no-brainer. He does this like really slurry, like, "Good evening, mama, father, sister, bro." And you're like, that's such a worse lyric. Like, I don't know who said, "Hey, how about good evening, people, welcome to the show?" Somebody had to suggest that. So
Well,
whoever
maybe that was one of Adrian Barber's big things on this record. That was
the one day he showed up to the studio. He's like, "Hey, change the lyrics. I'll be back in a little bit."
But the interesting thing too about this song is the guitar, the chord progression is very heavy, and even though it's very bluesy, this you can clearly tell like this is, that could have been a Black Sabbath riff.
Yeah, no, definitely. And Martin rightly pointed out this is the heaviest song on the album because the rest of the album does have kind of a blues feel. And according to Stephen's book, which is called "Does the Noise in My Head Bother You?" I forgot that was the name of his book. So
it's a good book, though.
Yeah, no, it's great. He wrote the song on the back of a tissue box in the backseat of a car as the band drove from New Hampshire to Boston to move in together. And then he sees this like, shining city on the hill, Boston. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I let me find the right quote. I was sitting in the back seat thinking, what would be the greatest thing to sing for an audience if we were opening up for the Stones? What would the lyrics say?" And Joey Kramer adds that these guys didn't have anything in common except they all wanted to make it, So this song was very near and dear to them, and they started their shows with it for years. I don't know for sure, but once you get back in the saddle, then I think that's where you have to start. But until then, this is a great opener.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a class. That's why he said "Good evening." Good evening, welcome to the show. It's clearly their opening song, which makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure before they even got in the studio and they're playing gigs, this was the opening song as well. So, kind of used to it. And I'm sure this was also like a lot of these bands' debuts, pretty much recorded live. You can kind of have that, it has that feel to it. It's kind of a live recording, and it doesn't sound that drastically different from that. Like the Paul's Mall show they included in the box set. It's good though.
Yeah, and I think that obviously it was not particularly well received. I saw that I don't know. I guess it was Columbia at the time. They put out Bruce Springsteen "Greetings from Asbury Park" on the same day, so they were clearly focused on another record that maybe they had a little bit more confidence in. But there's a great quote from Joe Perry, and he said in the band memoir, "Walk This Way," quote, "There was nothing at all. No press, no radio, no airplay, no reviews, no interviews, no party. Instead, the album got ignored, and there was a lot of anger and flipping out."
Yeah, but I think when you look back on the 70s, like so many of these bands took a while to really get. Kiss took a while. Then Lizzie took a while. AC/DC took a while. Like all these bands took a long while before they really got successful, which I think actually ended up helping them. Aerosmith got a little bit more success quicker. Probably, I mean, certainly "Toys in the Attic" blew up, and that was kind of their big record. But it gave them and certainly gave them some anger, which is always a good thing too for artists to be angry. So in a weird way, I think it kind of worked out well for them. That what would have happened if this record had gotten. Look, if this record had gotten really big, really fast, their indulgences probably would have been even worse. So
yeah, if they'd had
you might have done them a favor.
If they'd had the money in 1973 that they had in 1978, I don't think we ever would have gotten to "Done with Mirrors." One interesting thing was that obviously "Dream On's" on this album. It doesn't become a national hit until it gets reissued in 1975, but it was a huge hit in Boston. So "Dream On" was actually a #1 single for 1973 for one of the radio stations, WBZ, and a top 5 for a couple others. So they had their local fan support even on that song, but I mean, it's Boston. It's not a big enough media market for you to build on, I guess.
Yeah, and the famous story, I know Joe talks about it in his book, and I think Tyler talks about it in his book too, is that the rest of the band, especially Joe Perry, hated that song. I think it might have been Joe Perry's girlfriend or something at that time who really hated that song, and like they kind of quashed it for a while and didn't want it to be a hit song. And there's a whole story behind that. But the crazy thing about "Dream On" for me is like, how old was Tyler? 21, or was he even 21 at that point? But the guy's writing lyrics, like, you gotta lose to know how to win, and all these lyrics in that song that are like a young kid should not be writing lyrics that profound.
Yeah, so he would be 25 by the time the album came out, and
Oh,
he
well, all right.
says that he had written it a while before
That's
this.
what I thought. I remember in his
Yeah.
book he had written it when he was like 21 or something, I want to say. So
he didn't think it was very good, so he was kind of nervous about sharing it with people because he's like, oh,
yeah, and I remember the initial response from the band too, I think, was they didn't really like it either. So
well, look, it took the country a couple years to warm up to it too, but I mean, it is crazy to think about. It is one of those songs. It is what, they have so many signature songs, but that is definitely in the conversation for, a lot of people muttering on their way out of an Aerosmith show if they don't do Dream On, and it's totally an afterthought,
Absolutely. Cool. Well, always fun to have you on the show from behind the scenes there. So thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah, always happy to do it, especially when Aerosmith comes up. And if people want to find me on social media, I'm at Christian DMZ. I do have my personal podcast, the Bladtcast, Bladtcst. Brian's been on a few times, and we're going to have to talk about Rocks in a couple of months because that's about to hit a 50th anniversary. Rock and Roll Over later in the year. So find us over there.
I'm all good with those.
Thank you. All right. And then an ad will go here. And then
all right, we welcome in yet another metal legend. This man has managed Billy Sheehan since day one. He's been at Metal Blade Records since 1987, and he is, as we call, a lifer. Mr. Mike Faley, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on. This is a great look into and a deep dive into the songs that made metal great and started a lot of what we currently have now. And we're gonna address one of those bands today.
Exactly. And as I like to say with bands, and we've talked to Aerosmith on here before, but this is the bedmark, the launch pad of heavy metal. This is the what started heavy metal, and that's what we talk about a lot of these 70s bands. But you specifically wanted to talk about Aerosmith and this particular song, Make It. Why this song, Mr. Faley?
Because when I saw this band for the very first time, it was in October of 1973. And I had already heard about Aerosmith from a friend of mine who was a vocalist in a local band. And he told me, he goes, you got to hear this band Aerosmith from Boston. I'm going, who? What? He goes, Aerosmith. You got to check them out. I go, what kind of name is that? And a few months later, I listened to the record, and the very first song on the record just grabs you. It just grabs you by the scruff of your neck, throws you down, beats you up, and then throws you to the curb. Is the best way to describe it. They came at you as a gang when they went after an album and a song. Even though the production is not great on the record, you should pick up the new version of it. They did a remix. Tyler and Perry did a remix of the record, which is absolutely awesome. And Make It on there really sounds a lot better than it is now. But that song was what they opened up every set with. When they played a concert, that was the song that, here's our introduction, folks. Good evening, people. Welcome to the show. Tyler's all over the stage. Perry's all over the stage. They're a gang. They're an absolute street gang that came after you. And that's one of the things that got me. Every time I saw them in the early stages, I saw them twice during this time. Once was opening up for Mott the Hoople in October of 73. And then again in March of 74, they were just starting the Get Your Wings tour. And they turned around and played my college. At that point, I was a program director at the radio station at that point in time. And I know about Aerosmith, and I'm going crazy. I'm telling all my friends, you got to go and see this band. You're going to love it. And they came out and they just destroyed the college. I mean, they just went after it. And afterwards, we invited them down to the radio station to party afterwards. But the real interesting thing of this story is at that point in time, Tyler was taking a boombox on stage with him. He was recording every set to see how good the band was, and he put it right behind the monitor, his monitor. So after the set, these guys go backstage. They close the doors. Nobody's allowed in. And we hear a brawl going on. I mean, it's a drag 'em out brawl. that's going on. I'm going, oh shit. I go, these guys aren't going to want to party. They're killing each other in here. And we're waiting to go. Should we wait? Should we wait around? And it's me, I'm there, the program director. We have a few more of the disc jockeys on there. They want to party with the band. The door opens up, and these guys came out like the best friends in the world. They just got done in a drag them out brawl. You suck. You didn't play this right. You didn't play that right. That door opens up, and the gang of 5 comes out, and they're ready to party. And it's like, oh my God. It's like they were doing this from the word go. They were taking a listen to everything they were doing to make themselves better at that point. And it was something to see as a band being out there in the early stages, because you're right. This is the formative times of hard rock and everything. And America really didn't have those bands, Brian. You know, Black Sabbath is out there. You have Uriah Heep out there. You have all these Zeppelins out there. Tull is out there. All these bands, but they're all from England. America didn't have their big act. They didn't have their big arena bands. If they did, it was Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. It might have been the Beach Boys. It was singer-songwriters. It was, folk rock that was in there. You didn't have the heaviness in there. But boy, talk about ringing out glam and ringing in hard rock. That show did it, because the middle act that was on there was the New York Dolls, in between Mott the Hoople and Aerosmith. So you went from having basically a post-glam rock punk band with the New York Dolls into this hard rock band with Aerosmith, which to the American audience, this was their American version of the Rolling Stones. There's Tyler and Perry, Jagger Richards. That was the closest we could come to having that in the States. And that band went on to play arenas, and then go away and then come back and play arenas again. I mean, they had 2 distinct careers in their run. But boy, seeing them early, that was something else, because here's a band out of Boston who's thinking that they're gonna take the world by storm. Yet they had the right chemistry, they had the right look, and they go back. Look at Tyler. He was roadieing for the Yardbirds, and on the new record, on the issue of the new Aerosmith record, you've got them doing "I Ain't Got You" and "Train Kept a Rollin'," 2 Yardbirds songs live. There's a live thing on there, and both those songs are on there. That's a tribute to the influence the Yardbirds had on them. So it was something to see.
That's amazing. I wonder where those tapes ended up anywhere. That'd be pretty cool to hear a bunch of those early Aerosmith tapes. Yeah, I just literally got the box set for the reissue of the first Aerosmith album.
Listen to the remix. Listen to that remix. It's deadly.
Yeah, I'm going to. I wanted to get it done before we did the podcast, but the last few days have been super crazy, so I didn't get to it, unfortunately. But I've heard it's really good. Although one of my friends got the CD version and wasn't excited by the packaging because there wasn't a lot extra in there. But I'm imagining the box set should have something cool in it, right?
Yeah, I would think so. I know there's a book inside of it that they have in there. There's a booklet inside there. And again, I haven't seen it yet. I've listened to it on digital, on Spotify, and everything. Yeah. But
I always forget it's up on Spotify, right? I probably could have listened to that. I always like to wait until I get the vinyl version of these things and go to my little vinyl room and listen. And
I don't blame you.
Sitting on my kitchen
you get to
table,
open it up. You get to open it up. You get to pull everything out. You get to be surprised.
Yeah, it was good. So since you were around, you're doing college radio in the early 70s, and you're around when these guys came up. When this first record came out, and you, like you said, you saw them at that club, was there a buzz on them, or was it just kind of come out of the blue? Like, where did this band come from?
Brian, where did this band come from? They came out of the blue. They had released Dream On that did nothing at that point. Then they re-released Dream On in 75, and it becomes a massive hit. But it took that 2 years to get it to that point. And even at this point of what they're doing, it's still raw, very, very raw. We don't really start seeing what this band's capable of till Get Your Wings from a songwriting standpoint, and they get Jack Douglas as a producer. That's a big, big change.
Because I imagine that because they've always complained about the production on the first record, and that because the songs are there, but the production's not great. So I'm excited to hear the remix. But when you saw them live, was it much different? Like, okay, here's a thick, heavy sounding band compared to where the record sounded.
They were a gang. They came at you like a freight train. That's what it was like. They came at you. They hit that stage and they didn't stop. From the moment they hit that stage to the last song, they didn't stop. They didn't give you a break. Dream On was your only break that you got in that set, because they were hyped. They were now, their dreams they could see formulating for them. They weren't just going to be a band playing Boston anymore. They now were going across the country, opening up for Mott the Hoople, who had just come off, a big record for themselves. New York Dolls on their first record. They have hype going on them. Nobody knew who Aerosmith was. Nobody had a clue, but they found out pretty quick when they saw that tour.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that story too about them fighting, because if you read, especially if you read Tyler's book, and I think Kramer, all those guys kind of mentioned the tensions within the band in the early days. And I know that it's always been well documented that because Tyler's an amazing drummer, like he's a drummer.
Oh yeah.
So as the singer, he was always criticizing Joey, and I know it kind of it hurt Joey. And there's he talks a lot about that in Kramer's book about how that was kind of rough. So I could see them from reading all those books. I could see them after a show listening to that tape and going, "You fucked that up. You messed that up." I could see that.
I mean, you wanted to run for cover. They were yelling so hard you could hear them down the hall. And you had closed doors in a gymnasium, so they're inside in the gym. Inside the locker rooms, and you can hear them like just screaming and yelling. You're like, holy Jesus, this band isn't going to last. These guys are going to kill each other.
So did you end up partying with them afterwards?
Oh yeah.
How was that?
That was great. We went down to the station, put on some records, got some weed, and everybody's partying it up. That's what you were doing in 73. You went to college, where I was going to college, it was the only place to get music was to be at the radio station. But at that radio station, there's where I got the first Aerosmith record came in. The very first Kiss record came in at that point in time. This is the switch. This is where you're starting to see it. Blue Oyster Cult, Kiss, Aerosmith. All these bands are starting to come up. Derringer. All these bands, Ted Nugent. All these artists are starting to come up.
Alice Cooper?
Alice was already established at that point. In 73, Cooper was huge.
That was the big year. But they had come in before then. So when did you first see Kiss?
I saw Kiss on the Dress to Kill tour.
Okay, so a little bit later, because I'm always curious, because we talk a lot about the rivalry between Kiss and Aerosmith. In fact, I just did the Bladtcast, which our producer Christian Bladt does, and we talked about Kiss's Destroyer record, and Martin Popoff was one of the guests, and he was kind of going on about how he preferred Aerosmith over Kiss, because of that there are better songwriters, better this and better that. So I was the opposite. I mean, I love Aerosmith and I love the early Aerosmith stuff, but I was staunchly a massive Kiss fan. So I'm always curious about what other people, especially who saw them early on and had seen both bands early on, what they thought.
Kiss just destroyed anything you ever thought ever existed as a band. They took Alice Cooper one step further in the performance. Cooper was a character that was there. Kiss was four individual characters. When they did Jon Kirshner's rock concert, I was watching in my house. My parents were there, and they're going, "Oh my God, what is that?" They're going crazy. Like, you got to be kidding me. Jesus, my mother's name was Ginger, and my dad's going, "Gin, do you see this goddamn thing? Oh my God, I can't believe this." He goes, "Look at these guys." And here's a guy spitting, here's Gene spitting fire. Here's Firehouse going off. Here's Black Diamond going off. Here's Strutter. This thing's just exploding, but they are phenomenal. It was like, it was one of those things where you're just sitting there going, I can't believe what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I mean,
And,
I agree with you on the production level, but I'm always curious about the music part because that was always the big
music.
thing in the '70s. Kiss versus Aerosmith, and so many people thought Aerosmith were better because they were better musicians or better songwriters or whatever. I could argue either way, but I'm always curious what people that were around, like you were around when both of these guys were starting.
I'll tell you, when I got that record, I pulled it out. I got it in the mail. I took it out because you always check the records out before you're playing them on the radio. You didn't want anything negative going out on the radio at that point, or that was swearing or anything. So I put it on. First song you get was Strutter. Are you kidding me? It was like, you got to be kidding me. It was just right off the bat. You had a song that you could sing along with. That whole record, Firehouse, Cold Gin, Black
Oh, no,
Diamond.
I totally agree. I think it's amazing. But back to Aerosmith. So you saw them again after
I
getting
saw
your
them quite.
wings.
I saw them quite a few times after
Yes.
that point.
What were they like as a live band from the first album to after when Get Your Wings came out?
They got way better. All because they were playing with other bands. They were learning from the other bands they were opening for. They got more professional on how they delivered their performance. But you also saw it on the records too. You saw it on Toys in the Attic. You saw it on Rocks. And Rocks is when I thought they really delivered the goods right across the board. You know, that was a polished record with great songs. But live, they got better at how they delivered on a stage. You know, the performance, the songs, how they paced the set, and what they added to the set, what they took out of a set. You know,
and Rocks was super heavy too.
It was an incredible record. And it's funny because during those points in time, Tallis would end up one way, shape, or form with Billy Sheehan in it, ended up performing with Aerosmith. Aerosmith did the auditorium in Buffalo, New York, and Tallis opened up for him.
Oh, nice.
In the it was sold out. Another time, Aerosmith was coming in. They were doing stadiums. It was a run of dates, I believe, in 79, I believe it was. And they were going to do a run of stadiums, and they hadn't performed. So they needed to get some warm-up shows. So they came in as Dr. J. Jones and the Interns and played. And Tallis opened up for, and this is in a club, Brian. This is in a club the size of like
in 79.
In 79, they're playing a club.
That's
and
crazy.
they're every one of the guys is coming in his own limousine. Tyler and Perry aren't talking to each other at this point.
Yeah.
You know, so here comes 5 limousines pulling in. Every one of them gets out. They go and do their sound check. Tallis is opening up for them at that show. And it's Dr. J. Jones and the Interns. The people that owned the club at that point was Harvey and Corky. And, you know, they were the big promoters at that thing. That Harvey was Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah. We know him from Buffalo.
Yep. So
he's quite the character there, obviously.
Quite the character. And that's all we'll say about that.
Yeah.
But they had this club and they needed a show to go in there to warm up before they went up to Toronto to play at the stadium up in Toronto. And we ended up opening up that show for them. So through the course of the years, Aerosmith became a band that if they played in the Northeast or something, we ended up on the shows, especially in Buffalo.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I didn't get to see them too. I think the first time I saw them must have been 78. So I came a little bit later, but it's interesting. So the first record is really interesting because, you know, I love that record. I was definitely had it pinned as that's a record that potentially should talk about on the show. But I would have picked the song that kind of everybody knows, which is Mamakin. So it's interesting that you did make it. And I get it when I went back and listened to the song, just because I hadn't listened to it for a couple minutes. It is like, and because again, it's the beginning of Aerosmith. It's the early 70s, like you said.
Good evening, people. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, but it's the beginning of the whole, you know, American hard rock movement, and there's some super heavy riffs and stuff on this song too.
Yes. And that's one of the reasons I liked it, but I got to see it live, and seeing it live versus listening to it on the album, 2 different things, especially when Tyler and Perry went off.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, Yeah, I've heard a lot of that early stuff. And again, like we've talked about on the production level, it's, they weren't very happy with it. And clearly from what you're saying, like they were way heavier and way better live, obviously, than the record sounded.
They were way heavier live. They had the look, they had the backdrop at that point, that early Aerosmith backdrop that was in there. So again, the early stages of being a band, going out there and basically making your way, because nobody was giving them anything at that point in time. They had to fight for everything they got, and
Yeah. I mean, that's always the way it was, I think, back then. And that's the cool thing, too, when you look at the 70s, that, the record labels, even though they were large record labels, they were patient. It took Kiss until Kiss Alive. It took Aerosmith until Toys in the Attic, basically. But that's 3 records in when they got really big. And
yeah,
same thing with a band like Thin Lizzy that took forever. Even in Europe, it took forever. It took a lot of these bands. Rush. I mean, on and on and on. These bands.
Rush, the same point in time, 74.
Yep.
And look at Judas Priest. Sad Wings of Destiny, which is now being redone. But look when that record's out there in 76.
Yep.
And all these bands are coming up and starting to make a breakthrough, which would ultimately lead you to the new wave of British heavy metal.
Yeah, and like I said, this is, that's why I like to talk about all these 70s bands, because, I grew up in the 70s and it is a big influence for me. And it's like every single heavy metal band that came from 1980 on owes a massive debt to all of these bands. They're all huge fans of them. And, we wouldn't look at it today and go like, well, Aerosmith's not a heavy metal band. But when you look at it, that's the origins of heavy metal. This is a band that basically begat all of, Metallica's and Slayer's and, you name it, especially by the time you get to a record like Rocks, which I think is, we've talked about it before in the podcast. That was pretty incredible, because that record is super heavy for that time period.
It's an incredible record.
Yeah, it's a classic.
You start going through the songs, and the songs are deep on those records. Those early records, that you go like 4, 5, 6 songs deep on those records. And you don't find too many throwaways on those records.
Yeah. And it's also interesting, these bands were creating, in the moment of creating a genre, basically, because nobody else, aside from what you mentioned, the English bands, and clearly these bands were all influenced by, Zeppelin and Deep Purple and Sabbath and all of that stuff. But here they are, these American bands over here in the early 70s, that are creating a sound, creating a scene. And just interestingly, you mentioned earlier, you had Aerosmith, and you had Kiss, and you had Blister Cult, and like all these bands in various different regions of the country doing something that was based on, like, especially with Aerosmith, probably more blues than anything else, but it's still making it into like heavy music, which we didn't really have a whole lot of back then.
No, we had none of it. To be quite honest, we had none of it. Everything we got heavy was coming out of England. Anything I was going to see during that time was out of England. In a 1-month span, I saw Pink Floyd, Jethro Tull, and Led Zeppelin.
Wow.
In a 1-month span. But all English, no US bands.
Yeah.
Nobody heavy. So this was a turning point that I could see of, guess what? Bowie's about to pull the plug on Ziggy Stardust. Mott the Hoople probably on their last legs. T-Rex, same thing. All these glam bands are going away. There's going to be a new sheriff in town. And that sheriff is sitting at the front end of that tour, and that's Aerosmith. And that pretty much ushers in to a degree American metal.
Yeah, I mean, they were the curators of a lot of this stuff, which is why, I think it's important to look back on Aerosmith and go like, their early stuff was, again, they were groundbreaking, doing music that was groundbreaking, that was different, that was exciting, that again begat, everything that, we talk about all these years later.
Yep. And then having a second career, coming back with Walk This Way with Run DMC, and turn music on its head.
Yeah, it was a lot. I mean, then it kind of became, I think that's the thing that people, when you look at a band like Aerosmith, for example, they look at the 90s hits and all that sort of stuff. And, they kind of look at them as the big corporate, pop band they became. But the cool thing, when they first did the residency here in Vegas, and I was lucky to go, I think like 6 or 7 times, but the first 6 or 7 months, all they played was the 70s stuff. They would play maybe Janie's Got a Gun and maybe one other of the big later hits, but it was all, you know, Same Old Song and Dance and Seasons of Wither and, you know, Rats in the Cellar.
That's what I'd want to hear.
Yeah, and it was amazing. But the sad thing was, and so at first it was incredible. Like these shows were, and they were spot on every show, and those were really cool. But eventually, I think they got somebody got to them because the later shows had more of the 80s and 90s stuff in it. I was like, damn it.
Yeah, and I get it because you have another audience that came in on Aerosmith that knew nothing about the early days.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and what the band went through. All they knew was, you're right, Janie's Got a Gun.
Yeah,
that's what they knew.
Yeah, that's fine. I get that, but I just love the fact that they had the chutzpah or whatever you want to say to actually go out and like, okay, we're gonna do this residency and we're gonna play predominantly stuff that brought us up in the 70s, which again is, you know, as us older Aerosmith fans, these are the songs we want to hear. It was so great having them play it live.
It was a wonderful thing to see as they were coming up as a band, and to see a lot of those bands during that time. It was, you had no internet. You had very little to watch on TV. You had the Midnight Special and you had Don Kirshner's rock concert. That's all you had at that point in time. So, you know, you were happy if you got Aerosmith on Midnight Special, which they did end up doing Midnight Special. But seeing, you know, turn around, seeing Kiss, you know, they did a half an hour pretty much on TV.
Yeah, I'll never forget that. It still is pretty legendary today. But what's interesting too about a band like Aerosmith is that because there was no internet or anything, it took them a long time. And, you know, you were involved early on with something that has been very powerful, you know, really up until now. And that was college radio, because that's how a lot of people discovered so many bands. I was lucky to be in LA where we actually had a FM radio station called K West that was playing this stuff. But before then, it was you at a college radio station in Buffalo playing these things that people were able to hear. Otherwise, they would never know they existed. Yeah,
and I wasn't even in Buffalo at that point. I was about, I was like south of the city, almost near the state line between Pennsylvania and New York State. So, I mean, there was nothing in between. That's why I had to go to the radio station, because I wanted music. But out of that, you'd start getting these records in, and, you know, here's an Aerosmith record, here's a Kiss record, here's all these records by these artists that are coming in. You're going, oh my God, listen to this music that's coming in. And it was great to see, but it took a while for it to catch on. And it was college radio. It was word of mouth, going in and seeing these bands perform and opening up shows. Montrose opened up for Jay Giles' band. I saw them in Rochester, you know, on the second Montrose record. You know, so you were seeing some things of some bands that were starting to crop through. And if you don't have Montrose, you don't get Van Halen.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Everything begat everything for 100%. So I am very jealous that you got to see a lot of these shows, but thanks for sharing all these amazing stories, and really appreciate you doing this.
Thanks for having me on. It was an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. You can't leave yet though, because we have to upload the audio.
And then we need the ending from you. Yeah.
There you have it. That was a fun one. My good buddy, Mr. Mike Faley from Metal Blade Records, who's been there forever. A huge Aerosmith fan. Very jealous, though. He got to see them so many times back in the day, but he's got some great stories, so that was fun. Always great to get Christian Bladt out from behind the desk or behind the scenes and talk some production. He's great as always. And, of course, Mr. Martin Popoff, who is always incredible. Thanks to Lizzie Borden for our theme music. And again, a big thanks to Christian Bladt, the producer, for making this whole show happen. We'll see you guys next episode.